Hey everyone, I'm Gracie, and welcome to Grace of a Military Child podcast. The world should know how unique military children are. We may look like normal children on the outside, but we go through some pretty extraordinary circumstances that shape us to the leaders we are today. That is the sole purpose of this podcast, to share our stories to the world. Well, hi, Miss Antoine. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, Gracie. I'm excited to be the first adult on here. And I'm excited that you asked me and invited me. So thank you so much.
Yes. Well, you're not necessarily a military child yourself, but you work with them all the time. So what are those experiences like?
So I am not a military child. However, I'm a mom of a military child, and I do work with military connected kids. Actually, the current position that I have is not directly linked with the military students as I have had in the past, but man, have I had an amazing journey serving military connected kids. I worked at Fort Sam ISD here in San Antonio for about 2.5 years, launching a program there called the Military Student Transition Consultant Program. It was like brand new, piloted. And so I kind of initiated the vision of MSEC, which is an acronym for Military Child Education Coalition. I basically took a grant that they were working on with the Bob Woodruff Foundation. I believe USAA was also a funder. And I brought it to life essentially for that school district, for the population of the children of wounded warriors and those who were, being serviced and cared for here at the hospital in San Antonio. And then even really before then, though, I worked in one of the larger districts here that sat about maybe 10 miles away from the Air Force Base. So even in my role as a school counselor, our military population was well above 50% active duty and probably 60 to 65% veterans. And so I just naturally served that population without really even going after it with that intention. And then a few years later, I also did that same military student transition consultant position for Lackland Air Force Base, for their ISD rather. And that was maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. I was running one of their programs for a year. So it's just been part of my journey. Like I weave it in and out of the different experiences I've had in education. So like I said, right now, the position that I have is not directly linked to military because I have been so well connected with the military population through serving as a school counselor and serving as an MSTC, and then just having a child of my own when I married into a military family. And so my son, by the time he got to, I want to say second grade, all of a sudden we were a military family. And so experiencing those long stints of separation and that was just a journey. And we chose as a family to stay put because of my career while my husband finished his time in the Navy, but it still severely impacted so much of my son and my stepdaughter and just the whole process. So it's just kind of been part of what I do professionally and who I am personally.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Do you think having military children yourself, do you think that played a role in wanting to do what you have done?
I definitely think so, because it gave me firsthand experience of what a lot of kids, at least the foundational elements of what a lot of kids have been going through. I think every child's journey is different in life, period. So I don't want to completely make a summarization of like all military kids experience this, that, and the other. But
Sure.
I think each journey is a little different, but it certainly gave me some firsthand experience with just the culture of the military. What are those customs? What are things that typically happen? What are common themes that happen, so that when I sat in front of a family, or if I sat with a group of students, I may have been doing a deployment group or whatever it was we were doing, I had a perspective that was very similar to what they were experiencing, or at least I had a lens of a parent to also say, wow, like this could be impacting them in this way. And so therefore, let me make sure that I'm approaching it, appropriately.
Yeah, and I think that's really important too, because you can't just step into a situation with military kids not having any idea of what they
Mm-hmm.
could be going through because, it's so weird having a parent not be there for an extended amount of time, and then you have to try and live through that as well.
It really is. Yeah, I didn't even realize how much, like I said, my son was probably in about second grade, maybe even younger than that. After, as I really think about it, he was 6, so that makes like first grade. Like, wait a minute, second grade is not 6. Yeah, first grade
Yeah.
when my husband and I got together, and so yeah, like it was very hard. In fact, my stepdaughter, my husband joined right when she was born. To this day, she's 30 years old, and she never wants to join the military, doesn't want anything to do with it because for her, she equates that experience with her dad being gone. That's
Sure.
it. That's all she knows is that for graduating, I mean, not graduation, but those milestones of, I have a basketball game. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm in a play, and him just not being able to be there. And so I think I always say, I've seen it on both sides of the coin, right? We have some military kids that are super proud and they want to, join and follow in the footsteps of their parent. And then you have some that just don't want anything to do with it because it's just, although there were great benefits for her, her college was paid for and the insurance. But when you're a kid, you're not thinking about that. You're like, my dad is not here and I was in this basketball tournament. And so just again experiencing that with my own kids and then walking in and helping students, I got it. I was like, I totally understand how you feel. Again, not to say that every kid is the same, and I didn't experience it myself, but I watched it from a lens of a parent and had a better understanding of it, so it made it a lot easier to support those kids.
Yeah, and it's really tough. Like, I saw the injury side of, the military, and that made me not wanna join the military myself
Mhm,
at all.
mhm,
But it is those little things. There were first days of school that dad missed. There were last days of school,
mhm,
parties, like, and those were hard. Those were
mhm.
hard moments. Like, as a child, they were huge for me, but in reality, they were small moments. But that's what you remember. You don't remember, like, oh, this was fun. You remember, well, my dad wasn't there. My mom wasn't there. You
Mhm,
remember
mhm,
those a lot more because they stick
definitely.
out.
Yeah, they do. They do. So for that, I think I try to handle it with a sensitive lens, but at the same time, some kids are okay with it. So it's just
Yeah.
like you just have to kind of be open to whatever that child brings, right? And don't make
Mhm.
those assumptions like, oh, you need help. Where it's like, no, some kids don't thrive with that type of response. They thrive more with, let's just do what we got to do, and we'll just process it as we go. So you just have to cater it to the child.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because not everyone handles it the same. Some people are totally okay with a parent not being there for
Mhm.
months or a year, and some people are like, "Okay, my life is over now because,
Right.
I don't have one of my parents here."
I agree.
What kind of, things did you do in the schools to help, children cope with?
So, I did a lot, a lot. Like where to even begin? So,
Yes.
when I first started working with military kids, I was a fairly new counselor. In fact, I trained at a middle school that was, like I said, probably one of the highest military populated schools in the district that I was in at that time. So it was very quick, and like I quickly realized, okay, there is a need here. We do have
Yeah.
this huge population. How can we do things to support this population? So me and another counselor she was a veteran counselor that I was kind of learning under, we instantly started running like support groups for military connected kids. We got, and really the support group, the first one that we launched was more like a welcoming group, like having a set of ambassadors at the school that will be helpful for these kids that were going to be coming in and out at all times of the school year, because we constantly got new registrations, and the parent will walk in uniform, sometimes not, but it was just something that we were used to. It was part of the culture of that campus. And so we quickly realized, you know what, we need to have some type of ambassador program. And a lot of those types of programs exist at elementary schools, but the higher you get in grade levels, those types of things will dwindle away, because it's like, well, they're older, no one wants to have a buddy at the lunch table in middle school or high school. But we still decided to go ahead and do it. And I thought that it was one of our best programs that we launched, because it was designed to constantly make kids feel welcome and constantly make kids feel like they could be part of something. And so when we launched that was probably, I would say, my first specific like military affiliated program. And at that time, we did have a military brats club, which was something separate that one of our Air Force, it was a teacher, but I believe she was also an Air Force veteran. So she ran that group, which was great, because it was like, okay, we have, there's two things happening here on campus designed for those kids. And then from there, I think I did a deployment group at that campus as well. Because then it was like, at that time, deployments were still pretty, they were happening pretty regularly. That was back in like 2004. And so I ran a deployment group there. And then when I left that district and went into Fort Sam ISD, they had no real plan for what I was supposed to do. Like, they had a whole list. Imagine walking in and someone tells you, here are all the things we'd like for you to do. And then saying like, okay, how do you want to do it? And I was just like, okay. And that's still my favorite job that I've ever had in my 20-some year career in education. And the reason I loved it so much was, number one, they let me create it, right? It gave me a whole creative flexibility to say, here is a need. How do you think that we should, do it? Number two, the district was small. So it gave me a chance to really get to know the families. And I had come from, like I said, the largest district in San Antonio, probably second or third largest district in Texas. So coming from such a massive school district into this itty bitty, one elementary, one middle school, one high school, I was like, you know what? I actually can get to know people. People will get to know me. Like, this is so huge. And so, and then I started like getting to go. I went over to the Fisher House, and I was all over that base. I was all, for a person who, and I had never really been exposed to that base at all. When my husband was stationed in San Antonio, he was at Lackland. So that was the base that I knew. So it was like being in a foreign country with a foreign culture, because I didn't know Army culture at all. But I always say that I spent a lot of time kissing babies and shaking hands at Lackland, not Lackland, at Fort Sam. I had to get to know people, and I had to allow people to know me, because I knew what I could do. I knew that I could offer groups. I knew that I could offer support. I knew that I could offer parent nights and informational sessions. But what I quickly learned, especially about the culture of injured and wounded families, is that they come across sometimes as guarded, because it's like, what is your motive? Why are you here? Are you really here to help and support me? Or at least that was the experience that I had. And so I needed for those families to know that I was there with a genuine motivation, right? With a serious intention. Even in meeting you, I remember your parents being like super reluctant, like, who is this lady and why is she trying to help my kids? And so I spent a lot of time just like building relationships so that people could understand that I was really there with a pure heart and just wanting to offer as much professional support that I could. And so when I got there, to get back around to your question, I did run a lot of support groups for mainly, I really didn't focus on deployment. I ran a group I called New Normal, and New Normal was for kids who had parents who had come back different and had different situations happening. And so that group was for the elementary school. And then there were a couple other groups I did that had different topics. I think by the time I launched my group at the middle school, it was a more general, like just, hey, military pride, let's kind of house it that way, because I didn't want any student to feel, pointed out, isolated. Oh, this is my situation. Because at that time, everybody's situations were a little bit different. Like I had kids who had parents, one that said a family that I helped, and I remember the family, but I don't remember the exact kids, whereas the brother was the active duty service member, but he was so young. He was so young that he wasn't married. And so his next of kin was his parents.
Yeah.
So his parents and his younger siblings were at Fort Sam. And so the kids, they were just really literally tossed into this situation because they weren't military kids. They were just connected to their older brother, who actually ended up passing away from his injuries.
Wow.
And so I went to that funeral as just part of, I felt like that I needed to do that as I was supporting that family. So just those types of supports. Like sometimes it was scripted and like thought out, like, okay, I'm gonna run this program. I'm gonna have this parent night. I'm gonna bring, month of the military child. We're gonna do it big. We're gonna have newcomers camp, like those types of things. But then some of it was just in response to things that were happening.
Yeah.
That was just how that was part of what made the job so special and so unique.
Yeah. And I think all of that is super important. And even from a child who got to work with you's perspective, like those were some of my favorite memories that I have from Texas. Like coming and, hanging out with you and other kids and learning how to cope with what I was going through. And even in middle school, I didn't know what I was going through. I didn't know how to, I guess, process what was going on in my head. And knowing that I wasn't alone through all of that was so important. And even my sister coming and, being able to hear her thoughts, like outside of the family and outside of the hospital even too.
Yeah. That's so huge. And that means a lot to hear those types of, see, these are the moments that when you work in education and you're just going to work every day, and then you're like, a few years later, like, oh, I did make a difference. Y'all didn't think I was a crazy lady.
Not at all. No.
So that means a whole lot. That really does, because again, the work, I think, and there's so many people that do great things, right? There's never, I don't feel like there's just one person that makes a difference, but collectively, I think when we make those meaningful connections, they matter, right? And they show up and they surface in times of people's lives, sometimes when they need it the most. And so that's why, again, I love my time there. It was a tough, again, to initiate, because I was starting something brand new, something that didn't exist. And again, like creating my own job, creating my own position, and creating just the importance for why that grant was even written for that particular population. I remember one part of the time that I was there, I would go over to, I think it was Operation Homefront apartments, but I would go over there. And at that time, the students, there was no school bus that would bring them to Fort Sam, and they were pretty far away. And I couldn't understand, like I couldn't wrap my mind around everything that everybody was telling me about why there was no bus for these kids. And I'm like, but you're still not telling me why there's no bus. Like I'm getting all these calls, like, no, because I'm like, okay, but there's still no bus. And so, with just persistence, right? I just kept asking those questions and gently like saying, I don't think it's right. I think that we need to look at a way to be able to do this. Let's problem solve. Long story short, those kids got them. It wasn't a bus, it was a van, but whatever. And then having to get up that morning, I was like, ooh, what did I get myself into? I had to be up there at 5 a.m. to make sure. I was like, parents, please get your kids to this bus. Like I fought for this bus for y'all. But see, like those moments, and sometimes you see those things happen in real time, and it's like, oh, what I was doing really paid off. And then you have moments like this, where it's like 7.5 years later, then you have a student that says, that really helped me. So I think that's the joy of what we do when we work with other people and work with kids.
Yeah, and even those moments like the bus, like you took such a burden off of those parents' shoulders by just getting them a bus. Like it guarantee you, it didn't matter how early they had to get up to get their kids on that bus. It was the fact that somebody cared enough to say, hey, no, these kids need a bus. They deserve to have a bus just like everyone else does.
Yeah.
So we're going to get them a bus. And that's really what matters. The little differences.
For sure. For sure. Well, it's, like I said, it's a very, that position and just the job in general, serving kids is a very rewarding job. It really is.
For sure. And I can see that just like me leaving Texas, that transition was made so much easier. And then my sister as well. What kind of, I guess, tasks did you do with these kids in these meetings to help them?
So generally speaking, I mean, you run it almost like I said, almost like a support group, but it's not clinical, right? It's not a therapy session, but it's really designed to create that common space. And I think you said it earlier, like just not feeling like you're alone, right? To create those opportunities to share your struggles, your similarities, to share fun stuff. And so generally speaking, in one of those groups, we would usually start off with some type of opening, exercise where everybody's checking in. And I used to use these, I don't know if I use it with you guys, but there were these little emoji charts before emojis were a thing. But it had like 100 emotions and they had all these faces. And so sometimes I would start off by asking students to like take a little dry erase, which they would love because then it was like, let me just color all over this sheet. But, circle those emotions that you're bringing with you today and just kind of open up by talking about that. So any kind of opening where we're just checking in, whether it was like, what's the weather like in your head today? Is it cloudy? Is it sunny? Is it raining? Is it foggy? And just kind of opening with that. And then we would have some type of activity that we were going to do. It just really depended on the group, but some type of activity where we spent time talking. We may have done a craft. With a lot of the younger grade levels, you tend to do a lot of art and coloring and drawing and talking about that. In some groups, we may watch a clip of a video and then we would talk about what we watched in that video. I used to use a lot of Trevor Romaine stuff because I just love the animation, but even his middle school stuff had some really good dialogue and subject matter where older kids could kind of get with it, even though it was a cartoon. And so we would just kind of talk. We would talk through what was happening in that moment. And in some cases, it was a scripted curriculum that I kind of would jot down, like, here is a progression of what I want to talk about. And then there were times where we would just get in there and kind of have a rapid fire, or we would just play a game and talk through the use of a game. And then I was very big, even today, if I ran a group, I probably would do it because I'm just big on it, but I'm big on journaling. So at some point we would take out spirals and we would write. And that to me is important because it gives you a timeline that you can reflect and say, look at how far I've come. Like, I may have been super worried or super sad or really anxious about something when this first started, but 6 weeks later or 8 weeks later, I'm doing much better. And then I love even the notion of pulling that out 10 years from now and saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe when I was in that group with Miss Antoine, this is what I was writing about, right? So that was always an element that I included when I did my groups. And so that's kind of the structure of the group. And we usually met for about 6 to 8 weeks. That was like the time frame. But yeah, that was what we did in those groups. Do you remember any of those things?
I do, actually. I was talking about it with Kaylee today. She's like, I don't ever remember meeting with Miss Antoine. I was like, no, you did. And we both remembered making the cornstarch stress balls with the balloons.
Yes.
We both remember doing that. That is such a memory that I have in my head that I will never forget doing that. And then, I mean, just sitting in the middle school, like I remember much more of the middle school than I do the elementary school, just because I was older too. But yeah,
and
journaling.
I think y'all used to come at lunchtime.
Yeah, we'd come and have lunch in there. Yeah. I remember so many of those, and just being able to talk with the kids in there and, you know, relate to them and another level, especially because I think the one I was in had only injured kids in it with their parents were injured. And yeah, just being able to connect with those kids on a different level and being able to share our stories and what we were going through. And of course, journaling. That has stuck with me ever since. I wish I had many more of those journals because I don't have any of them. I wish I did. But
I know it'd be cool to go back and see, right?
Yes, even just like looking back at papers that I have from school and like essays I wrote and things like that. Those are so important and so special because that's how I was feeling at the time. Like even if I was writing an essay on like the Civil War or something, you could tell in the tone that I was writing in how I was feeling. Like, that's so special for sure.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely stuck. You've definitely made a difference. I promise.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Really, really cool.
Yes. So how do you take what you do in the schools with the military kids there, and how do you transfer it home? Do you use some of the things you use in the school at home since you are a mom to military kids as well?
Oh, you should ask my son that question. The subject of all my activity. Yes, not always directly, but indirectly, a lot of it, yes. I mean, it just becomes part of who you are when you do it all the time. And at that time, for sure, because he was a student. I mean, now he's probably about your age. He's 21 now, and so he's away at college as well. But at that time, absolutely. Again, not exactly in the same way, like, oh, let's sit down and do this or that. But there were a lot of things that I would interject into just our regular family time because I knew it worked. And so why not? You know, like we would do things like I'd say, okay, everybody write down 3 different topics that you want to talk about, and we're going to put it in a jar. And at dinner, we're going to pull them out the jar and we're going to talk. Like the average parent doesn't really do those kinds of things. When your parent does like groups and let's play a game, you know, those are the types of things that I felt were important for just the development of, you know, him as a person and just getting accustomed to being able to talk through things. You know, this generation of, you know, 20 somethings and under, really even 30 somethings, that's one thing that I feel like is really, really a weaker, you know, it's just something that I think that can be better about the generation of, you know, millennials and Gen Zs is that connection and really working through what you're feeling and not just holding on to it, not just going into, you know, I'm just going to check into the digital world and not really address it, but like, let's address it. And so I absolutely would bring different things home. But like I said, I would package it differently so he didn't necessarily feel like it. And even then, to him, I'm mom, and I was always mom. So it's like the things that I wanted to give him, he didn't think they worked. But if it was somebody at school or, you know, someone else, and they're like, oh, yeah, mom, and I'm like, and I always tell the joke is even now, like, what do you think they pay me for? And he's like, I know. So yeah, I do share some of the same things and I use them because why not? Like if I'm going to do it with someone else's child, why wouldn't I do it with my own?
Yeah. And that just, makes sense to be able to carry, not doing a full on support group at home with
Right,
like a
right.
one-on-one session,
Yeah,
but, having those times where it creates a stronger bond too,
it does.
between, mom and son and, having those moments that, you know, who knows, you could have learned something that you could have taken into the classroom at that time too.
For sure, for sure. I remember going to conferences in DC, the MSEC conference, and sitting through trainings and hearing things and wearing both hats. I mean, I think we wear multiple hats all the time, but my wearing the hat of I'm here for work and I'm here to get information for supporting students, but you can't turn off the hat of, man, that's really good information. I could take this home and actually apply it to, supporting my child. And the friends of, because that was the other thing, all of pretty much everybody he was friends with, their parents were military or
Yeah.
retired. So I definitely fielded a lot of phone calls, a lot, like, oh my God, Kamilah, let's go. I would get phone calls all the time, from parent friends who had questions about whether, especially school related, credits transferring, how to get things, how to find things, what's allowed and what's not. So yeah, you just, that expertise is not confined to, only between 8 and 4 am I going to use this set of knowledge. It literally becomes part of your life.
Yeah. And even now, after I've been through, sessions with you and having the transitions and feeding through all of that, and even outside of the military, like, my own school and figuring all that out. And it doesn't turn off. It does not turn
Yeah.
off. Like, people, I'll get texts from people, even non-military, and they're like, how do you do this? Like, what do you do? Like, I need your help. And I'm like, okay, like, that's
Yeah.
what I think. It's so important to have an advocate
Mhm.
to a military child or even any child in general, just to be able to say, okay, here's everything I'm going through. Can you put it into words to say,
Right.
okay, this is, what you need to do. This is how you need to
Yeah.
help yourself.
Definitely. That's cool. Look
Yeah.
at you. You've built up a toolkit that you didn't even know you had.
I know. And sometimes it's like, really, like, why did I have to do this? Like, why is everyone coming to me? But it's so special to be able to have those connections with people.
Yeah.
And you help people. And in all, helping people is so much more rewarding than anything else you could ever imagine.
Absolutely. Yep, you're right about that.
So, one last question for you. What advice do you have for a military child who might be struggling?
I would say, that you're not alone. There are so many, and you may be struggling and have a unique struggle or a unique situation or a unique circumstance, but you are certainly not alone. There are other military kids, there are just other kids in general that have some of the same common themes and the same common concerns and the same struggles and issues. And so, my biggest suggestion is to get connected. Get connected with someone, some way, whether it's through your family, through school, through a friend, through sports, extracurriculars, get into the arts, like find something that keeps you grounded so that you have something that is a constant in your life. Even if you play a sport and you got to change that, team, even if you're an artist and you have a new art teacher or whatever, or you always do art with your mom and now she's gone or whatever, just find that constant and allow that to be something that really nurtures a side or a time in your life where it's tough. Because at the end of the day, things always change. Like nothing ever stays the same. That was something my grandmother would always tell me. She's like, whether it's good or bad, nothing ever stays the same. So if you're going through hardship, if you're going through a struggle, know that it will get better. But in order for it to get better, you have to actively engage in trying to work at getting it better, and being willing to talk, being willing to, or get it out through journaling, find an outlet. I feel like for kids who struggle, for people who struggle, there's no one way to get on the right track, right? There's no one way to fix it, but through a combination of support, having an outlet, finding something to really pull you in, a combination of things will be what turns the page to allow you to see that, you know what, this is not forever. My parent will come home. My parent, and maybe sometimes the parent is home, but maybe that parent came back different. Working through that, right? And understanding that this is the situation that we're in. How can I support my parent to make them better? How can they support me? And how can we build a new relationship with new memories and new things, and really holding on to the things that are the good, and really working through the things that are tough. Because I wish I could say that life will be easy and that it will, instantly get better. And it doesn't always. Sometimes it takes years and years to heal situations, but having those constants, having those supports, and just really approaching it from so many different angles is what makes the difference, I feel, for a lot of kids that struggle, in particular as military kids. So I hope that makes sense. I hope it didn't seem like I was rambling, but really, like I said, there's not one right answer. You know what I mean? Like not. There isn't, and it just depends on the person, and it depends on the level of support. Because that person may say, "Well, no one in my family is there." Well, then that's when you see who you're tapping into at school. Who's that one teacher? Who's that one counselor? That one coach? That kind of looks out for you and checks on you and asks you, are you okay? And doesn't just take, yeah, I'm good, for like as a good enough response. Who is that person for you? Like identifying who that person is, and really just when they ask you if you're okay and you're not, just say, I'm not, and see what they say. Like if they say I'm not okay, or you say I'm not okay, and they, think twice, or they want to sit with you, then that's your person, right? And so figuring out who that might be for you.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And just having someone where you can talk to and someone who can understand you is something that everyone should have, military or not, and having ways to get what you're feeling inside out. And whether that's talking directly one-on-one or journaling.
Yeah.
Like those are so important to have.
They are like I said, that outlet, like you just said, it's huge. And for everybody, it looks different, journaling, writing poetry, writing music, art, dancing. There's just so many things now that allow us to be creatively free, able to express ourselves in a way that allows us not to carry things, not to carry burdens and carry too much weight. Like you're not intended to walk through the world carrying the weight on your own. You're intended to share that weight with others. And so just recognizing that. And when you're young, it's hard, but yeah, or at least maybe find a mentor, find a Gracie in your life. Like she'll hook you up. You need somebody who's maybe come to the other side of it. Maybe they've been through it. So yeah, for sure.
Yes, I think that's great. So thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your experiences and advice.
Thank you. It's been so awesome. You made my day. You made my month by just having me and hearing from you and seeing you, and just, man, you really have made my day. And I'm so blessed and grateful that I've been part of your journey. And so everything that you're doing, you're literally planting seeds for another generation of kids who may be going through what you went through, or maybe worse, or maybe not as bad, but what you're doing is huge. And I don't even know if you realize what you're doing. And so I just want you to know to keep doing it, And to know that these are moments and opportunities that not only are your parents proud, but people that have watched you grow are proud to have said, hey, I was part of that. And I got to see it firsthand. Like, I feel like I'm with a celebrity right now talking to you. So yes, you're doing an amazing job though, seriously.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And, it's been a journey and it's not over yet, and it's not going to be over for a while. So,
and that's okay. It's a roller coaster ride.
It is
take it for sure. That.
Yes.
Take it for that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Grace of a Military Child podcast. For more inspiring stories like these, be sure to review, like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. You can also find us on @Grace of a Military Child podcast on Instagram, and be sure to check out our YouTube page. If you are or know of a military child who would like to be featured on an episode of this podcast, DM us on Instagram. Be sure to tune in next week when we hear another inspiring story. Until then.